welcome back to my channel. It's Jessica Ward King, the StigmaCrusher here. So if you've been around for a bit, you may know that I have been undergoing a major depressive episode as part of my bipolar disorder since about December, so about 6 months now. And I am happy to report that it seems to be lifting a little bit. So I've gone from about on the scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is the worst feeling ever and 10 is the best feeling ever. I was hovering around a 2, and I'm up at around a 5, a 4 or 5. So that's good news. I mean, we're not cured or anything, but it's definitely an improvement, and I will take that improvement all the way to the bank. But what I wanted to reflect on today was that problem with we're not cured yet, that we've gone from a 2 to a 4 or maybe a 5, and I want to be fixed, right? I want to be fixed, and like in my mind, for some reason, even though this is definitely not my first rodeo, right? This is definitely not my first rodeo. I've been through these cycles of depression and getting well, and depression and getting well many times, and I know how they go, and yet every single time I seem to forget, which may partly be because of my poor memory and partly just be because of human nature and the fact that we forget how these things go. That I want to go from being depressed to being well. It's like you're either depressed or you're well. Why are you sort of a little less depressed? How does that work? And I have to remind myself that it's a whole spectrum mood. It's a spectrum of well to unwell and unwell to well. And that's why we use these Likert scales. And anyone that's ever had a mood disorder will be very familiar, I'm sure, if you've ever been treated for your mood disorder by a therapist or by a doctor or psychiatrist. I'm sure you'll be familiar with these Likert scales, with these on a scale of 1 to 5, how much are you? And it's like how happy do you feel? How satisfied do you feel? How sad do you feel? How all of these, like, the mood states do you feel, and then other things as well. But you kind of have to then rate your mood on this 1 to 5, and if you go week to week or every 2 weeks or even every month, it can be splitting hairs for well, how did I feel last month? Well, do I feel a little bit better, or do I feel a little worse, or do I feel the same? I don't know. Is it why don't I just put 3? I'll just put 3. That seems the safest option to me, because it can be really difficult to really do that gradation of your mood along this scale of how do I feel if I try to number it. And yet it seems to be a pretty convenient way to think about it, because when I'm trying to explain it to you, I went from a 2 to a 5, it seems to be the best way for me to explain how I'm feeling relative to how I was feeling, and why that's better, even though it's not all better. And it seems very artificial, and yet it also seems very convenient to do. But it's really worth reflecting on that it's not an all or nothing thing. And yet at the same time, there is an all or nothing kind of status to it. Either you do have major depressive disorder, or you don't. You've heard my musings before on mental health versus mental illness, and the idea that mental illness is a thing that either you do have or you don't have. And then you can have, various gradations of mental illness, but you either do have it or you don't have it. And then mental health is a thing that everybody has. And so you either do have mental illness or you don't. You do have depression or you don't. And yet once you do, you can have a rainbow of gradations amongst that diagnosis. The mood state is completely endless that you can have once you're in there. And it's worth remembering that, because when you are, or at least speak for myself, when I am in a depressive episode and I'm down there at that 2 and that 1, that, here I am again using the number language. When I'm down at feeling my worst and feeling like everything's hopeless and everything is the bleakest it can be, I don't feel like there are any other feelings in the world that there can be, right? There is no slightly better than that. There is no slightly sunnier or a little bit better or medium better. In my mind, there's either all better or right where I am, which is the worst there can possibly be. And so having the experience of starting to get better and not going to that all better, but going to that medium term better, that little bit better, it's a very humbling experience, because you get there and you're like, well, is this it? And my experience is starting to think like, am I better? Is this what better feels like? Or is this just a teaser or a little bit of something but not better, and I'm still depressed? Because if you're expecting better and you're getting better, the expectations really, they toy with you. They make you think, is this it? Is this what this is? It's like, I don't know if anybody that's in the Northern Hemisphere, if you went and tried to see the Northern Lights the other day, the Northern Lights, there was a big solar storm, and some places in the Northern Hemisphere could see the Northern Lights. And some folks went out expecting to see the purples and the magentas, excuse me, the magentas and the blues and the greens. And they went out and they saw kind of a white cast thing, which is the Northern Lights. I've seen the Northern Lights before in northern climates, and that's Northern Lights. And I mean, so is the green and the blues and whatnot, but the white is legit. But if you went out there expecting to see the greens and the blues and you saw the whites, you'd be like, is that it? And that's the feedback I got from some of my friends and family members, was what I didn't think that was really it. I thought that was maybe something else. And that's the experience that I've been having with my depression. The other experience that I've been having with this not quite getting there experience with getting better with my depression is having the kind of backsliding of, well, if this is it, then maybe like this isn't enough, and feeling more depressed because of it. And so having my expectations make my recovery feel less spectacular. and therefore make my recovery feel less than, right? And so it's really the expectations are kind of the star of the show here, what we're talking about. The expectations of I'm going to get all the way better, and only getting, part of the way there, and having those expectations really ruin the whole experience, rather than getting part of the way there and rejoicing and thinking, wow, I've gotten a little bit better and I'm going to get more a little bit better. No, having those expectations really thwart the entire experience. And so it's worthwhile, I think, for me to remember this, to reflect on this and to remember this while I'm having the experience of recovery from my major depressive disorder, or my episode rather, because my own expectations and my own mindset can really change the course and just the whole trajectory of my actual recovery. Now, the other thing that can be said about this whole experience of recovery is that recovery is not linear. And I think we all have an expectation when we're coming out of, now this hasn't been a particularly long episode of depression. 6 months isn't short, isn't like, wow, that was super short, but it's not particularly long. It's just particularly for me. I'm speaking for myself. But it was not a pleasant experience. And so coming out of it, I'm expecting, to go straight on out till sunrise. I want to kiss this baby goodbye. And yet I know in my mind that recovery is not a linear process. And I've already seen that. So I've already just, I guess, go back and fill you in. I've already gone from the 2 to the 5 to the 4 because I've had some particularly difficult side effects from the medication that seems to be credited with getting me better. I've had some very difficult side effects that have made me had to go back on the medication and try different things, and that's caused me to have a mood setback. And so I've gone backwards a little bit, and which has itself kind of compounded and made me go back even more, because I'm like, oh no, now I'm going back into the depression again, and gone back even more. And so it's not a linear process, and yet there's still the expectation, and particularly I find in our modern society, that things are going to, go forward. They're going to go straight forward. And I think that I, to a certain extent, have that expectation, even though I know in my mind that it's not the case. I still have that expectation. And so again, the expectation can really change the course of how I experience my recovery, and therefore how the recovery actually goes. And so I think something that's on my mind a little bit is that when patients, myself included, are going through a depressive episode, that there should be some psychoeducation about the importance of expectations around recovery, the importance of about, of course, the trajectory of recovery, about the fact that mood lies along a continuum, and that all of these things that we've talked about today, this kind of psychoeducation that would maybe not always sink into the level that it needs to completely and fully prevent people from causing their own strife in their recovery, but maybe just enough to cause some level of insight that would prevent a little bit of that strife, right? And so I'm thinking even of myself. I've got some of the insight, and yet I forgot, right? I plumb forgot this time around, and kind of found myself falling into these thought patterns and falling into these expectations, and stopping and, you know, shaking my head and thinking to myself, wow, what about all of these things that you know, and how could reflecting on these things and, you know, knowing these things more deeply really help your recovery and the trajectory of your recovery. And so I'm hoping that now that I've really had a good deep think about these things, and a good, a conversation with you guys about these things, that my recovery, that the trajectory will be a little bit smoother. I know it won't be linear. It's not going to be a straightforward process, that I know. But that knowing that I'm not going to go from, you know, a 2 to a 10, that I'm not even going to reach a 10, that I'm not going to go from necessarily a 2 to a 5 to a 7 to an 8, that I'm going to go back up and back down, that these things are going to help me in my recovery journey. So please do let me know if any of this resonates with you in your journey to recovery or through recovery. And let me know if you have any thoughts on the recovery process and how it could be made a little bit more smooth for the rest of us. So take care of yourselves this week, and I will see you in my next one. Bye.
Stigma Crusher.